In Bloomfield, Missouri, the local high school moved like a wind-up watch. Bells rang every 47 minutes. Classrooms emptied and filled again like tides. Teachers repeated the same greetings at the same doors, and students flowed like water through well-worn channels. But before any of that began, there was Thomas Webb. Every weekday morning at precisely 6 a.m., he stepped through the east entrance with the same slow, deliberate gait. His walk was uneven, one leg stiff from a long-forgotten injury, but he never used it as an excuse. He wore the same steel-toed boots, the same zippered navy uniform jacket, and the same gray knit cap in colder months. One gloved hand always carried a battered thermos that had outlived at least 3 generations of school coffee pots. The other gripped a keyring heavy with decades of silent responsibility. No one asked why he came in so early. No one needed to. By the time the first teacher arrived, the hallway lights already glowed, scuff marks had vanished from the floor, and the day's first maintenance issues had been quietly resolved. Thomas had a habit of restoring order before the day even noticed disorder had visited. He kept his cart in a tucked-away closet near the boiler room, cleaning supplies on the top shelf, tool belt folded neatly on the second, and a small plastic container labeled exams filled with spare batteries, pens, and calculators for students who always forgot. He never asked who needed them. He simply made sure they were there. Most staff barely noticed him. They might nod absently, might mutter a tired good morning without meeting his eyes, but rarely did they ask how he was. Thomas existed on the edge of attention, blending into the walls he wiped down and the floors he polished. He preferred it that way. Recognition often came with questions, and he was a man who'd learned to live without explaining. Still, there were a few students, only a few, who truly saw him. 1 or 2 seniors from the auto tech class who noticed the precision with which he repaired a loose doorknob. A junior girl in biology who once thanked him quietly after finding her broken locker fixed with a fresh combination dial. A freshman boy who noticed the janitor was always the one who pulled out extra chairs when the back row filled too quickly. But those moments were exceptions, not rules. Mostly, Thomas moved like clock hands, always present, always moving, but rarely looked at. That Friday began like any other. The early light was thin and colorless, filtering through the low clouds with the softness of washed-out parchment. By 6:30, Thomas had changed 2 hallway bulbs, cleared fallen branches from the east parking lot, and wiped down the water fountains in the north wing. At 7:40, the bell rang. At 8:05, the storm came. It moved in fast, thunder rumbling like a freight train long before the rain began. Lightning flashed once, then twice, and then the lights cut out across the entire school. Emergency systems clicked and failed. The backup generator, a second-hand machine older than some of the teachers, coughed, sparked, and fell silent. In a building suddenly stripped of order, the routines crumbled. Teachers held up phone flashlights, directing students away from windows and deeper into the center of the building. Intercoms were useless. The guidance counselor used a whistle to guide a line of freshmen into the gymnasium. Someone tripped on a stairwell. Someone else screamed. The cafeteria manager radioed a message that never got through. Chaos swirled beneath the storm's roar. Thomas watched it all quietly. From a hallway near the science labs, he assessed the situation the way he might have once evaluated a down power grid or a fallen bridge, calculating variables no one else saw. He moved toward the maintenance stairwell that led to the basement. He knew where the electrical panels were, where the leaks had been patched last spring, where the rust crept in through tired seams. He also knew what a complete failure of both systems meant. He approached a teacher directing traffic toward the gym. "Basement," he said. The teacher frowned. "It's not safe. They said wait for the fire crew or an inspector. I can check the breaker." "Not your responsibility, Thomas." He paused, then nodded, stepping back. He didn't insist. Didn't argue. Instead, he moved toward a group of scared sophomores clustered near the stairwell and used his flashlight to lead them down a side hall where the floor wasn't slick with tracked-in rain. He helped one boy with a limp catch his balance and guided him gently by the elbow. When a crying student asked if the storm would break soon, Thomas didn't answer. He simply offered the boy his knit cap. The rest of the day unfolded in confusion. Classes were canceled. Parents were called. By noon, the principal declared the building would remain closed until power and inspections were complete. Students were dismissed in staggered waves, guided through the dark by flashlights and emergency exit signs. By 4 p.m., the school was empty. The storm still raged outside. Thomas remained. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't leave when others left. As rain hammered the roof above and wind cracked against the loading dock door, he moved through the silent halls, switching off the few battery-powered lights that still blinked red. His shadow stretched long on the walls as he returned to his closet near the boiler room. There, he changed. Out of the school-issued jacket and into a heavier canvas coat, one bearing faint letters along the shoulder that time had mostly erased. From beneath a locked cabinet, he retrieved an old military toolbox, heavy, dented, and covered with faded stickers, unit insignias, coordinates, and a small bronze star pin taped inside the lid. And then, Thomas Webb disappeared into the stairwell that led to the basement. Into darkness. Into memory. The basement of Bloomfield High was not built for comfort. Long before safety regulations were tightened, it had been dug and poured as a utility space, narrow corridors, exposed piping, cold air thick with dust and forgotten repairs. Most staff avoided it. Even maintenance requests for the area came with notes, use only if necessary. But Thomas Webb knew it well. His boots found each step without hesitation. The overhead lights had died, but his flashlight beam cut a narrow path through the dark. Water dripped somewhere near the back wall. A thin trail had big asterisk end to form, rainwater, forced through cracks by pressure and time. He followed the lines of conduit until he found what he expected, the fuse box. It was older than the rest of the school, its cover rusted at the hinges. Someone had sealed it with caulk months ago, but storms had their way with old buildings. He touched the edges, feeling where moisture had big asterisk end to spread. Behind the panel, the circuitry had blackened in spots. A lesser man might have paused. Thomas only reached for a wrench. He laid his tools out on a nearby shelf, each in the same order he had learned decades ago. His hands moved with purpose, despite the slight tremor in his left. The ache in his knee flared as he crouched, but he braced himself against the support beam and ignored it. Fuses. Connections. Wiring. The damage was bad. Several parts would need replacing. But what troubled him most was what was missing, a failed contact relay that would need exact dimensions, not something easily replaced. He scribbled quick notes on a worn pad and returned to the stairwell. Upstairs, the wind groaned through the gym roof. An old banner fluttered against the window. Thunder rolled, low and steady, like a drumbeat fading into memory. Thomas stepped back into the hallway, removed his wet coat, and headed for the staff parking lot. His truck was the only one left. He drove slowly, cautious of the flooded streets. On the edge of town, past a faded billboard and the remains of an old gas station, he pulled into a gravel lot beside a small trailer home with a rusted mailbox. The light above the door flickered once, then steadied. Inside, the air smelled of old paper, oil, and rain-soaked insulation. The spare room was organized, but only barely. Plastic bins held electrical parts from forgotten projects, switches, breaker boxes, worn wiring harnesses. Shelves were labeled in black marker, some dating back to his days in the Corps. He scanned quickly, pulling what he needed from different bins. A cracked voltmeter. Spare fuses. Replacement panels. The contact relay, he found one that matched close enough. It was nearly midnight when he returned to the school. The storm was beginning to ease. Rain softened against the pavement. The air held the cold hush of a storm passing, as if nature were exhaling. Back in the basement, Thomas worked faster now, the rhythm familiar, like solving an old puzzle. He swapped out the corroded contacts and secured the replacement parts with electrical tape so old the edges curled. When he connected the final relay, a soft click echoed through the room, followed by the faint hum of power stirring back to life. A moment later, the lights blinked once, then held steady. Heat surged back through the vents. Emergency panels turned green. No alarms. No applause. Just a return to order. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth, and turned off his flashlight. There was nothing left to repair. The school breathed again. He made one final pass through the main halls. A trail of muddy footprints led from the entryway to the gym. Tables were stacked awkwardly from the rushed evacuation. He straightened them. In the cafeteria, a juice box had been crushed underfoot. He wiped the spill with a towel. Before he left, he replaced the batteries in the clock above the principal's office door. Time should be right when the students returned. Outside, dawn crept over the fields, soft light chasing the storm's retreat. The clouds broke apart in streaks of pink and silver. His truck sat under a thin coating of wet leaves. No one would arrive for another hour. Thomas walked back to the janitor's closet, hung up his coat, folded his gloves, locked the toolbox. He poured himself a small cup of coffee from the thermos he'd packed before the storm. It was lukewarm now, but familiar. Then he sat on the old stool by the boiler room window and listened to the building warm up. There was no sign he had ever been there. The lights worked. The heat ran. The school would open on time. Teachers would joke about lucky timing. The principal might credit a late-night power crew. No one would know. And Thomas would never say. It had never been about recognition. It was about the quiet peace of knowing something broken was whole again. A silence that spoke more than any announcement ever could. Monday morning arrived on time, as it always did, with the same slow trickle of teachers shuffling in with travel mugs and tired greetings. The school buzzed to life without fanfare. Lights glowed. Heaters hummed. Clocks ticked. No one questioned how, after a weekend storm that had flattened fences and flooded basements across town, Bloomfield High stood untouched, ready. Thomas Webb was already there, of course. He was always there. He was sweeping near the main entrance when the first teacher paused. "Strange," she muttered, looking up at the ceiling lights. "I thought we'd need a whole crew out here today." She said it aloud, but not to Thomas. She didn't really expect an answer. In the main office, the principal sat with his coffee cooling beside an untouched checklist. He clicked through his email, searching for a work order confirmation, some update from facilities, or a contractor's invoice. Nothing. No calls. No overnight crew logged. He made a note to ask later, then moved on. In the gym, the bleachers were dry. The scoreboard blinked awake with a soft chime. Custodial reports showed no action taken beyond basic cleanup. Students noticed too, but in fragments, a conversation in the hallway, a comment between classes. "Didn't the storm hit here hard? How'd we get power back so fast? Bet someone stayed overnight. Probably the maintenance guys." But none of them really paused to wonder who had done it. Except Zach Harper. Zach was a senior, the type of student who did well enough to stay unnoticed. He wasn't in clubs, didn't stand out. But he observed. He noticed things others dismissed, how the vending machine always worked again within a day of breaking, or how the back stairwell was always the first cleared of snow even before staff arrived. That morning, he noticed Thomas reaching for a replacement filter in the supply room. Nothing unusual, except for the way the old man winced as he raised his arm. A stiffness in the shoulder. A delayed breath. It wasn't pain he was trying to hide, it was the habit of hiding pain. Later, Zach passed him again near the auto shop. Thomas was kneeling, fixing a loose floor tile. Beside him, a tool lay on the ground, sleek, compact, and unmistakably military. Zach wouldn't have thought twice about it if not for the engraving on the handle, a barely visible set of initials and a date carved into the steel. Not a store-bought multi-tool. This was something else. During shop class that afternoon, Zach showed a photo of the tool to Mr. Albright, the former Marine who taught mechanics and welding. Albright squinted, his weathered fingers tracing the outline on the screen. "Where'd you see this?" he asked, voice low. "Custodian had it," Zach replied. "Mr. Webb." The teacher's face changed. "That's a field-issue combat engineer's tool," he said. "We used to get those custom. Only issued to master sergeants and above. This isn't standard gear." Zach frowned. "You sure? I carried one just like it for 2 tours. You don't forget a tool that keeps you alive." Something settled uneasily in Zach's chest. That evening, he went home and searched the school website. There was no bio for Thomas Webb. No photos. No records of employment older than 10 years. The rest was blank space. But Zach wasn't the only one wondering. Someone in the district office had also raised a question. A school board member wanted clarity on why no contractor had been called over the weekend. An assistant superintendent placed a call to the head of facilities. By Tuesday morning, it reached the mayor's office. A quiet inquiry was made. Then another. Eventually, the question landed at the state's Emergency Services Agency, passed along through routine verification channels. It took just a few clicks. Then the file opened. Thomas Edward Webb. Master Sergeant, United States Army Corps of Engineers. Enlisted 1972. Retired 2005. Deployed in multiple humanitarian and combat missions, Afghanistan, Bosnia, Kuwait. 3 Bronze Stars. 1 Purple Heart. Clearance level, Restricted Operations Division. Known in military circles as Sergeant Wire, a nickname earned after rerouting field power in a forward operating base under active fire. At one point, he had restored electricity to a bombed hospital using only salvaged parts and a pack of gum to bind a broken switch housing. Field notes described him as the kind of man who shows up after the world falls apart and quietly puts it back together. Records showed that after retirement, Thomas had declined every formal recognition. No parade. No speech. Just an address in rural Missouri, and a job listed as custodial staff, Bloomfield School District. The discovery spread in whispers. A staff member who'd been skeptical now scrolled through military photos on her lunch break. In one, a younger Thomas stood beside a downed transport truck, his uniform charred, his hands black with soot. In another, he crouched beside a generator with wires fanned around him like wings. By third period, word had reached the students. Zach sat with a printed copy of a military article tucked into his binder, unsure what to do with the weight of it. By final bell, everyone knew what the storm had hidden and who had answered it. But Thomas, walking the halls with his mop and thermos, said nothing. He nodded at passing teachers. Picked up a gum wrapper. Straightened a crooked poster. And when asked by a freshman if he'd ever done something cool in the Army, he only smiled. "Just fix things," he said. "Same as now." And he moved on down the hallway, unnoticed again. But not for long. Tuesday morning began with state exams, row after row of students bent over bubbling sheets, the ticking of clocks and rustling of papers the only sounds in the building. Teachers moved quietly between rows. Outside, the sky was bright but cold, the kind of crisp air that hinted at seasons turning. Then came the van. No one expected it. No announcement was made. But at 10:07 a.m., a white broadcast vehicle pulled up beside the school's flagpole. Its satellite dish rose slowly into the sky. A second van followed, marked with the State Emergency Services logo. A third car, sleek and dark, parked behind them. The driver stepped out, adjusted a coat lined with brass pins, and looked up at the building like it was a monument. In the main office, the phone rang. The receptionist's eyes widened. 3 minutes later, the principal walked briskly toward the janitor's closet. "Thomas," he said, hesitant, unfamiliar with using the name. But the old man was already moving. He had a mop in one hand, keys in the other. His face was calm. The expression of someone who'd heard many doors knock and knew how to answer them without fear. "They're asking for you." In the front lobby, the tension was electric. Cameras stood ready. Reporters whispered into microphones. Students pressed against the glass doors, faces wide with curiosity. Then, silence. Through the hush came a man in full military dress, retired General Marcus Ellery, head of the state's Emergency Coordination Unit. Decorated. Revered. His presence was like a dropped stone in still water. Everyone felt the ripple. He stepped forward. No microphone. No notes. "The school behind me stands warm, lit, and whole this morning," he began. "But just 4 days ago, it was dark, broken, and left without support during a statewide emergency. That changed because of one man. A man you've all passed in these halls. A man you may not have looked at twice." Cameras pivoted. Students turned. There, just beyond the glass doors, stood Thomas Webb. Still in uniform. Still holding his mop. The storm knocked out half the town. Grid systems failed. But here, at Bloomfield High, power returned before any crew could be dispatched. Why? Because Master Sergeant Thomas Webb didn't wait for someone to tell him what needed doing. He acted, as he always has, with courage, precision, and humility. A reporter raised a photo from 2 decades ago. In it, Thomas was crouched beside a damaged field generator, flames in the background. The caption read, "Sergeant Wire saves field hospital under fire." Another photo flashed on the live feed, a commendation ceremony, a young man refusing the spotlight. "Award declined," the article read. "Service is not ceremony." "I met Sergeant Webb in Bosnia," General Ellery continued. "When an orphanage lost heat during a siege, he rewired the building using copper torn from a collapsed roof. He didn't ask for orders. He just worked. Because that's what leaders do." By now, students were pouring out of classrooms. The gym doors opened. The staff emerged, eyes wide. Phones recorded. Not because they were told to, but because something real was happening. Then came the moment. From his coat pocket, the general removed a coin. Heavy, silver, engraved with a unit crest and the words, "For duty in silence." He approached Thomas and placed it in his palm. "This isn't a medal," he said. "It's a thank you. From the men who watched you work. From the families who never knew your name. And now, from the students who walk these halls without ever knowing who kept the lights on." Thomas didn't speak. He only looked down at the coin, then up at the faces gathered. Some he recognized, Zach Harper near the front, eyes bright. Others he'd passed for years without a word. They were quiet now. Even the ones who used to ignore him. Even the ones who had once said, "He's just the janitor." In that silence, something shifted. The principal stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Thomas, we'd like to offer you a position, district lead for emergency infrastructure." But Thomas shook his head gently. "I'm needed here," he said, almost too softly to hear. "There's still work to do." He returned the mop to its place, adjusted his thermos on the cart, and walked back down the hall. That afternoon, students began leaving notes on his cart. Folded paper cranes. Thank you cards. Someone left a fresh cup of black coffee with a lid. Another left a photo of a young soldier next to the words, "You remind me of my dad." By Friday, the school board passed a motion. The east stairwell door would bear a small plaque. In honor of Sergeant Thomas Webb. Quiet service. Enduring light. And every year, on the first day of spring, one spotlight would be turned on outside the basement door. No announcement. No speech. Just light. A tribute to the storm that passed, and the man who met it without needing to be seen. Thomas never stood beneath that light. He could always be found nearby, though, washing windows, tightening screws, placing a fresh calculator in the exam bin. His name was spoken now. But it never changed how he worked. It only changed how others watched. And for once, they really saw him. Kindness without question is enough.